Hello everyone, and welcome back to another card game tutorial video. In this video we will go over how to create a coin flip mechanic. Some Pokemon's move effects are dependent on a coin flip. For example, if we take Squirtle, his bubble move says flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon is now paralyzed. So if I set an energy card on Squirtle and I use this move, I want a coin object to be created in the center of the field on the player's game, and a coin object to be generated above the card that needs the coin flip on the opponent's game. And as you can see, when I select Bubble, we have the coin flip. Now, if you noticed, that flipped 2 coins, and that's because some Pokemon effects call for multiple coin flips. So in our program, we will also need to create a coin object that can call itself recursively. And if you notice, the turn doesn't change until the very last coin is flipped. As you can see, the other player was unable to draw a card until that coin flip ended. So let's get into this. If you enjoy this series and would like to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you would like to support the series and be able to download these files, be sure to check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. So the first thing we want to do is in our field card object. Beneath the new code we added to our move select conditions in the last video in our step event, we're going to add the following line. We're going to create a local variable called coin, and we're going to set that equal to a script called moveEffect1. And we're going to pass this script the card number and the move select that we have chosen. This will be a value of either 0, 1, or 2. If coin is equal to 0, a coin object will not be created. If coin is equal to 1, a coin object will be created, and that coin will land on tails. If coin is equal to 2, a coin object will be created, and that coin will land on heads. In order to get the value of coin, we will set the variable equal to the script called moveEffect1. So let's create this script. I'm going to add the following comments to keep track of what the return values represent. And we are going to pass this script two variables, one being the card number at argument 0, and the other being the move at argument 1. And then we're going to create a switch statement based on that move value. If move is equal to 1, we're going to input the code for all of the first move effects, and then same for case 2, except with the second move of that Pokemon card. So then we're going to have a bunch of if statements that say if card number is equal to whatever the Pokemon card we are creating the code for, we are going to input the code for that effect. Now, Squirtle's move effect says flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon is now paralyzed. So what we want to do is we want to return a value between 1 and 2. So we're going to utilize the iRandom function in GameMaker to select a random value between 0 and 1. But then we're going to add 1 to it just so it's a number between 1 and 2 instead of 0 and 1. Now, this is what we need for if we want to generate a coin object. If we don't, what we're going to do at the end is we're going to return 0. So then if we take a move condition like Poliwags, that says that the move does 10 damage plus 10 more damage for every additional water energy card on Poliwag that was not used to pay for the move, and then it's capped out at 2. So that doesn't need a coin object to be created. So all we're going to do here is we are going to increase the damage depending on how many water type energies are on Poliwag. So the best way to do that is to create a local temp variable, and we're going to set that equal to the type count minus the number of type counters that are needed to use the move. And then if the temp value is greater than 2, we are going to cap the additional damage to be 2. And then if it's not, we're going to add that amount to our damage. So if we recall in the last video, we initialized our damage variable to equal 0 in the step event. That's because we want our damage to be recalculated every step of the way. And when we call our move effect script, it's going to increase our damage from 0 to some other value. But we want our damage to equal whatever the move damage is plus whatever new damage we add to it. So what we need to do here is we need to change this equation to be plus equals, just so it will add the damage to 0. And if there are any other increases to our damage, just so we don't lose any of these values. Another move effect we're going to go over today is that of Doduo's, and that's because Doduo's move effect says flip 2 coins. If heads, do 10 damage for every coin that lands on heads. Doduo needs 2 coin flips, so we want to make sure we have the ability to have as many coin flips as we need. Some Pokemon even need up to 4 coin flips, so we want to keep that in mind. So Doduo's card number is going to be 48. And what we're going to do for Doduo is we're going to return a value between 1 and 2. Now of these 3 Pokemon, Squirtle is the only one with a second move that has a move effect. So I'm going to go down to case 2, and I'm going to paste this code here. Just because Squirtle's second move effect states flip a coin. If heads, prevent all damage done to Squirtle in the next turn. So that is also based on a coin flip. We need to add the function randomize to our create event since we are utilizing the function iRandom. Now that we have this, we can go back to our field card object and add the condition that will create the coin object or continue with the attack. If the coin is needed, we want to postpone the attack until after the move effect has been completed. So what we're going to do is, if coin is a value greater than 0, we are going to create a coin. And in order to do that, we'll use a script called createCoin. And we are going to pass that script call 4 variables. The coin value, the move select value. We also want to track the amount of coins we are creating, so we are going to pass it the coin counter. Since this is the first coin, we're going to pass it 0. And then we are going to pass it the position of the field card object. And then if it is equal to 0, we will continue with the damage calculation. Now we also want to copy this over to all of the subsequent move selections. And now we can create the script called create coin. So we are going to pass it 4 values, and then we are going to create the coin object, and then with the coin object we are going to set the following values. We're going to create a player pointer and set that equal to object player. We are going to set the position of the coin to be equal to the position we passed. We are going to set the value of coin equal to the coin value we are passing. Same with the coin counter. And the move value. Then we want to set the sprite index of the object to equal that of the throwing pokeball. And then we want to set its alarm 0 equal to the length of the sprite index and then we want to multiply that by 3 and add it by 10. Now, the reason that we are doing this is because for our coin, we are going to use the throwing Pokeball animation. And we want that to revolve a few times before stopping it on either heads or tails. So in the alarm 0 event, that is when the attack will continue. But then we want to create a message so that the opponent can have a coin representation at their end. And that message structure will look like this. If a client doesn't exist, we're going to return from this script call. We want to start from the beginning. We are going to write to it the coin create macro that we have not created yet. And then we're going to pass it the value of the coin flip. And then we are going to send it to the server. But we want the player's turn to end after the coin flip has computed. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an alarm for the player. And in alarm 6 is when we are going to change the turn. And we're going to set that to the same length that we set the coin object's alarm 0 to, but we're going to add it by 2, just so it's a little bit after. So now let's create the message coin create macro, and that will take the value of the next macro, which is 17. So now let's create the coin object. So for the create event, the only thing that we will need to add is a randomized seed. Then in the draw event, we are going to add 2 conditions. So if coin is 2, we want the coin to land on heads. When alarm 0 is less than 10, we are going to set the image speed to 0. And that will force the sprite to stop at the correct position. And then same for if it's tails and alarm is less than 16, we want it to land on tails. And then we're going to do the same thing for when we utilize alarm 1 for both cases. Now the next thing we want to do is we want this to be printed above everything else. So we're going to set this depth equal to -3000. But since we have set stuff in our draw event, we cannot forget the draw self script call. Now, in alarm 1 is going to be where we continue the attack. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 local variables. The coin value, the card value, and the move select value. Then with the player object, with the field card at that card position, we are going to call on a new script called moveEffect2, because this will be a continuation of moveEffect1, and we're going to pass it 3 variables: the card number of the card, the move select value, and the coin value. Then if the player's field phase is true, we're going to calculate the damage and send it to the opponent. And we only want that to occur 1 time. So after that's called, we are going to set the player's field phase equal to false, just so we make sure that we only send the damage of the move 1 time. And then we're going to destroy the coin object. So in the instance that we need to create a coin object at the opponent's end, we don't want to do any of these calculations. We only want the coin object to destroy. So that's what we'll add in alarm 1. Now let us create the script moveEffect2. This script will be nearly identical to moveEffect1. So I'm going to copy this over and paste it here. Except I'm going to remove the polywag condition, since that card does not rely on a coin flip. And within these conditions, I'm going to add the effect of a heads value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if coin is equal to 2, I'm going to affect the opponent, because Squirtle's move effect is if you land on heads, you're going to paralyze the opponent. Now, other Pokemon can confuse, poison, or make the other Pokemon fall asleep. So I'm going to use the same script call for all 4 of those cases. And I'm going to pass this script 2 values: the position of the Pokemon we're affecting, and a number that represents the effect that we are going to add to that card. So let's create this script. So there are 4 ways a Pokemon card can be affected, and we're going to represent those by numbers. So if I pass this script a 1, we're going to paralyze the Pokemon, 2, we will poison them, and so on. So we're going to pass this script the 2 values, position and the type. And then depending on that type, we are going to set the following conditions. Since a Pokemon card can only have 1 condition at a time, when setting 1 condition to true, we must set the rest to false. So if type is equal to 1, we're going to set paralyze equal to true and the rest to false. Type is 2, we're going to set poison to be true and the rest to be false, and so on and so forth. But then we also want to send this as a message to the opponent. So if the client object doesn't exist, we're going to return, and then we're going to write this message to the buffer. The first thing we'll write is the macro of the message, then the position and the type. And that's all we will need to do for this script call. But before we move on, let's create this macro. And this macro will have a value of 18. And now we need to initialize these values in our field card object and the opponent field card object. Now, in order to show the effect on the card, we will add the following conditions to our field card draw event. We will also add these conditions to the opponent field card object. So, in the opponent field card object, below image angle is equal to 180, we'll have the following if-else statements. Now, if the card is supposed to be paralyzed, we're going to represent that by a lightning token. If they are poisoned, we'll represent that using a grass token. If they are asleep, we'll represent that using a colorless token. And if they are confused, we'll represent that by using a psychic token. Now, before we move on to our player's field card object, note that in the Y direction it says Y plus the card height divided by 2 minus 19 divided by 2. Because in our player field card object, in the Y position, it will say Y minus card height divided by 2 plus 19 divided by 2. So that's the difference between the field card object and the opponent field card object. But going back to move effect 2, when we affect the opponent, let's add this case to our client handle message script. Now, the first thing that's going to be in this case is we're going to read the two values from our buffer, the position and the type. Then, with our player object, with the field card at that position, we are going to set their condition values the same way we did in our affect opponent script call. So it's going to be this same exact thing, except instead of it being the opponent object here, it'll be the player object in our client handle message script. Now let's create the case for message coin create. But now the first thing we need to do is create two local variables to store the position we want the coin object to be created. And where we want that to be is right above the opponent's field card at position 0. So we're going to store that X position in a variable called X position. And we're going to store the Y position of that card minus the card height minus 33, just so it can be a little bit above that field card. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to read the two values from that message. And then using those values, we'll create the following coin. We're going to set its coin value to equal that of the one we just read from the buffer. We're going to change the sprite index to equal that of the throwing Pokeball. And then instead of using alarm 0, we're going to use alarm 1. And we're going to set that equal to the sprite length of the sprite index. We're going to multiply it by 3, and then we're going to add 10 to that. And that's all we will need to do for this case. But now let's go back to our move effect 2 script. We still haven't done the conditions for Doduo and Squirtle's second move. So for Doduo, if the coin has landed on heads, we want to send 10 damage to the opponent. So we're going to reuse the message send damage script, and we're going to pass it a damage of 1 to represent 10. We want to affect the Pokemon in the 0 position, and the move we're using is the one that is passed through argument 1. And then the next thing we want to do is if the coin counter of the coin object is less than 1, we want to create another coin. And we are going to pass it a random value between 1 and 2. We're going to pass this the move value. And then for the coin counter value, we are going to increment the coin counter value prior to passing it to this script call. And then we're also going to pass it the position of the coin object. So this is what will create our second coin. So now the beauty of calling this script call again through the coin object is, since we set the player's alarm 6 to be greater than that of what the alarm 0 was, which is what called the move effect 2 script, it will elongate the player's alarm 6, and this is what postpones the turn to change. So for every coin that's created, the game will wait longer and longer to allow the opponent to start their turn. And that's all we will need to do for Doduo's move effect. So now let's create the player's alarm 6. And the only thing that's going to be in this alarm is the message to change the turn. But now let's go back and do Squirtle's second move effect. So for Squirtle's second move effect, if the coin has landed on heads, we want to prevent the damage dealt to Squirtle in the next turn. And we will do that by creating a script called message prevent damage. So let's create that. Now the first thing we want to do in this script call is set a prevent damage variable equal to true. And this variable will belong to the field card that created the coin. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to send the opponent a message. And the only thing we're going to write to that message is the prevent damage macro and the position of the field card. And that's all we will need to do for this script. But now let's initialize this prevent damage variable in our field card object and in our opponent field card object. Now if we go back to our message prevent damage script, we also need to create the macro for this message. And that will be equal to 19. But now we need to utilize this variable that we have now created in our damage calculations. So if we go to our send damage message, this is where it calculates the damage at the player's end. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a condition that says if prevent damage is true, we're going to set damage equal to 0. Then after that, it will add damage to the damage counters. So that effectively negates any damage that would have been done to this card. But now we need to do this at the opponent's end, and that will be in our client handle message script for the message send damage. So we'll add that same condition here. Now, when the attack is over, we need to input a way to turn off the prevent damage switch. In our reset switches script, we will add the following code. This will turn off the prevent damage switch for all of the player's field card objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through all of the field positions, and if the field card value at that position does not equal no one, which means a field card is there, with that field card we're going to set its prevent damage variable equal to false. Now we'll also need a way to switch the prevent damage switches to false for the opponent's field card objects. We reset the player's prevent damage switches at the very beginning of the player's turn. This reset switch script is called right after the player's draw phase is set to true. But we will need the opponent's prevent damage switches to be reset at the end of the player's turn. In order to do this, we'll add the reset switches script in the turn change message script. So if we go to turn change, at the very top, we are going to add the following with construction. With the opponent object, reset switches. Now, I would like to reiterate what we have to do to accomplish this correctly. It can be quite confusing if you focus on it while thinking of both players. To simplify it, only consider one player. If a player resets one of his field cards' prevent damage switch to be true, it needs to stay true until his next turn, which is why it doesn't switch to false until the next time the player's draw phase is set to true. Remember, the opponent object is just a representation of the other player. When the other player's draw phase is set to true, that player's prevent damage switches will be set to false. Therefore, we need to update our opponent object to match. That is why we added the reset switches script in the message turn change script. So now we can go to our client handle message script and create the case for our prevent damage message. And with this case, we're going to read one value from the buffer, and then with that value, we will set the opponent object's field card at that position. We'll set that object's prevent damage value to be true. And that's all we will need to do for that. But with that, we are now finished with the card game program. Let us add the macros and the cases for the messages we created to our server program. So if we switch to our server, and we go to our server object in the create event, and now let's add these cases to our server handle message script. Now, the first case we're going to add is the case for the message effect opponent, and we're going to put that right below our energy remove message case. So here we will put case message effect opponent. And then the next one we'll do is the prevent damage message, and we'll put that right beneath our remove prize message. And then we're going to put the case for our coin create message right beneath our prevent damage case. And that's all we'll need to do for our server program. So now let's test this. And it looks like the moveEffect2 script expects 2 arguments, but we have provided 3. And that's because we did not create the local variable for the coin at argument 2. So now that we have that, we should be able to test our game. So let's test this. So if I set Squirtle down and give 1 energy, if I use his bubble move, you should see a coin flip in the center of the field at the player's game, and then you should see a coin flip animation occur above this card in the opponent's game. So let's test that. As you can see, it did. Now let's set Poliwag on the field. And in order to test his move effect, we need to have more than 1 energy on him. So we'll come back to him. Now another thing I want to test is to see whether or not when this lands on heads, if Poliwag becomes paralyzed. Since that didn't land on heads, we have to wait till the next turn. But now that we have 2 energies on Poliwag, let's see how this affects Squirtle. As you can see, when I use this, instead of doing 10 damage, it did 20 damage, which is correct. But now let's see if we can paralyze Poliwag, which we did. As you can see, that is represented by a lightning bolt on both cards. So that's great. But now let's see if we can do 30 damage to Squirtle. So if you pay attention to here, this should turn to 5, as it did. But now let's see if when we overstack Poliwag, if his damage still gets capped at 30, like it should. But as you can see, that damage wasn't sent. So there's something wrong with that, and we'll fix that in just a moment. So if I use withdraw, since it landed on heads, the opponent should not be able to do any damage to Squirtle. So let's evolve Poliwag into Poliwrath and try to use his Whirlpool move. And as you can see, that did not kill Squirtle like it should have. But now let's see if that variable was reset. Now I should be able to destroy Poliwag. As you can see, it did. But now there's 2 things I want to do. I want to figure out why Poliwag's damage didn't go through, and I want to test Doduo's move effect. But now, in order to test Doduo's move effect, I'm going to change this condition to equal Squirtle's card number. And I'll just remove this whenever I've verified that it is working correctly. But now let's go back to move effect 1 and figure out why Poliwag's effect isn't working. Now what I think happened is in the field cards create event, we set the prevent damage value to be true when it should be false. So we're going to correct that here, and we're also going to do that in our opponent's field card create event. As you can see, we also set it to true here when it should be false. And one more thing before we test this, when we set the player's alarm equal to this value, we actually want to make it plus equals this value, just so it elongates the alarm the appropriate amount of time. Now, one last thing before we test this is we shouldn't have put sprite index here. It should be the sprite of the throwing pokeball. So now let's test this. Now let's test that when we use Squirtle's bubble card, that it creates 2 coin tosses, and that the opponent isn't able to draw a card until after those 2 coin tosses are finished. So I'm going to select this move, 1, 2, and then the opponent is able to draw a card. And for Poliwag, let's make sure that his damage is being sent to the other player. So it was, so that's working fine. And with Squirtle, let's make sure that for every heads, 10 more damage is being sent to Poliwag. So 1, 2. So 20 should have been set because his move does 10 damage, and then we got 1 heads, which sent 20 damage to Poliwag. But now the next thing we want to do for Poliwag is to make sure that his damage caps out at 30. So he should have done 20 now, which he did. This time, which he should have, now this time he should only do 30, but since Squirtle used his withdrawal move, no damage was done to him. And no damage will be done to him again since he landed on heads with his withdrawal move. But we'll at least have this move ready. Now it should only do 30, but if it's working incorrectly, it would do 40. Again, it landed on heads, so we got to do this one more time. So now that it landed on tails, when we look at Squirtle, it should go from 3 to 6. If it goes any higher, it's not. If it goes any higher, Poliwag's move effect is not working properly. So I'm going to use the move, and it did go to 6. So we know that works properly. And that is all I wanted to go over in this video. In the next video, we'll go more in depth in other Pokemon card move effects. If you guys are interested in this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support this series and download these files, be sure to check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Until next time.